Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. The introduction of the legislation, the EU's PSD2 and the UK's open banking have cemented the place for FinTechs in the 21st century banking model. By removing much of the red tape that surrounds financial services to facilitate digital transformation, encourage collaboration and ensure security by design. Much of this is enabled using open APIs. But what do we know about the API layer and the security vulnerabilities your FinTech is threatened by when it's exposed? Today, we'll be dissecting the bot threats to FinTechs, a digital-first industry that has revolutionized banking over the last decade, and the critical defensive steps to take to secure your customers and your business. Taking the helm is Joe Cavadias, Head of Strategic Global Alliances and Technology Partnerships at Netacea. Joe manages and works closely with Netacea's partnership network, which comprises of strategic alliances and technology partnerships to ensure their clients stay ahead of the latest bot challenges, while collaborating with Netacea's product and threat teams to research emerging bot trends across industries. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. So today we want to start with what is the bot threat to FinTechs? The accessibility and mass data dumps and proxy servers are creating a breeding ground for automated bot attacks such as credential stuffing and carding attacks, exposing the financial services industry to new and growing threats. FinTechs recognize that there is a distinct threat to business and even state customer loss to be their top concern. And this makes sense. Financial services providers are entrusted with their customers' livelihoods. And if they're compromised, it could have dire consequences for the customer. The top bot attacks identified by FinTechs echo our own experience, particularly in regards to credential stuffing. We've seen these attacks increase dramatically over the last 2 years as the cyber threat landscape in FinTechs has shifted. And the accessibility of mass data dumps and proxy servers have created a breeding ground for credential stuffing attacks. Critically, credential stuffing is exposing financial institutions to varying degrees of fraud and theft, creating an urgent need to take proactive measures that minimize risk to your customers and cost to your business. So are you API aware? What is an API? An API is an application program interface. It connects services and transfers data. Lots of different types of data can be transferred via APIs. And so any implementation of security for APIs needs to be specific to the API and the data being transferred. The introduction of open banking allows businesses to use a bank's API to enter the financial market without needing to wade through layers of red tape. So who can access your API? APIs sit between the payment service provider and the third party to make sure that data can be shared between the two. But security is critical here, so access to your API needs to be restricted to regulated third parties. According to our recent threat report, financial services organizations don't currently consider their API to be at risk from bot threats. And yet, as we've seen from our own customers' experience, FinTechs are highly vulnerable to threats targeting this layer. PSD2 requires FinTechs to implement secure API infrastructure by design. It's important to work with your eyes wide open here. APIs are becoming an increasingly attractive target for cyber attacks, as well as websites and applications. Creating a resilient API environment is absolutely crucial to maintaining a truly secure and high-functioning ecosystem in which both the FinTech and the third party are protected. Once an API is exposed, bots can be used to take over accounts, scrape data, and prevent the API from servicing users. Attackers are always looking for that crucial, easiest point of access. And APIs used to share data between banks and third parties or mobile applications have a particularly high risk factor to new threats. Attackers will attempt to gain entry to the vulnerable API layer via its 3 access points: the browser, mobile applications, and the API server. Once they have successfully accessed this layer, they can carry out a myriad of attacks, including credential stuffing. So to tackle the greatest threat, we first need to understand it. And understanding the problem is key here. If a bank account is accessed using the correct login credentials, how can you identify the legitimacy of the user versus an automated attack? This is something that we have a lot of experience with our existing clients, in particular some of the FinTechs that we're going to speak about today. So what are credential stuffing attacks and how are they carried out? Credential stuffing is the practice of using usernames and passwords to fraudulently take over user accounts. Data dumps consisting of millions of unique combinations of usernames and passwords are readily available at scale and little to no cost. Although a portion of the data in a given dump is likely to be stale, poor password hygiene and password reuse means that even old data can be valuable to attackers looking for personally identifiable information for malicious gain. With this multitude of PII to hand, automated web injections are used to carry out multiple login attempts at a time against the targeted online accounts in brute force stuffing attacks. Once an attacker has one password for a user, the greater the opportunity to find another account belonging to the same user and exploit this is also applicable. And you can see from this screenshot that's been taken from haveibeenpwned.com on the 11th of November, some of the relevant information to this particular area. Cool, so let's talk a little bit about credential stuffing in action. So what we can see here are some of the credit card validation attempts. And we can see that these are performed at scale. So we can see, just over 300,000 card validation attempts in a 24-hour period. So these attacks are done at scale, but they're also sophisticated as well. So it's important to have protection that can pick up on the scale of these attacks, but also pick up on how sophisticated these attacks are as well. If we look at another different type of attack, this is more about sort of username and password combinations. Once again, we can see what we call a sustained attack. So 27 million login attempts over a 67-hour sustained attack. So this is a long period for a botnet attack to be taking place, with a lot of login attempts over this period as well. And once again, it's about having a solution that is proactive and robust enough to be able to detect these types of threats and take the necessary course of mitigation dependent on the scenario. So let's look at some comparisons between our technology and some of the other techniques used by this particular client and other clients that we've spoken to in this area. Firstly, let's look at a comparison between ourselves and another bot management tool that was in place. So server-side detection from ourselves was placed behind another specialist bot management application, and we identified thousands of undetected threats in comparison. And you can see there 38% more threats were detected by our solution than the client-side bot management tool that was in place. If we also look at the in-house specialist team that had put a serious amount of resource into this area. So they had a specialist security team of 8 that had worked on a custom solution for 4 years. And then by implementing us, they saw 55% more threats detected than their existing solution. And then finally, if you versus us against a world-leading security appliance that was in place, our server-side detection was placed behind this leading dedicated security appliance, and we were able to identify 75% more threats. So across the board, we regularly see that as soon as our technology is put in place, we're able to discover more threats than other solutions, whether it be other bot management solutions, security appliances, or even in-house team resource that might have been deployed.
Thank you for going through the basics of API security and the threats, the bot threats to FinTechs with us. I'd really like to dig in a bit further into the API security element, because I know it's something that you've been talking a lot to customers about at the moment. You've had a lot of people asking you about it and prospective customers. So why in particular is API security something that FinTechs need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I guess the feedback that we've had from existing FinTech clients and also FinTechs that we're currently in discussion with has been that API security is really becoming more of a priority for them. And I guess the reason is that the core functionality of a lot of FinTechs relies heavily on APIs in comparison to, you know, some other areas of financial services. Some of the more sort of legacy parts of financial services are less reliant on APIs for their core business, shall we say. But when it comes to FinTechs, APIs, they're a huge part of what they do, and they're very much reliant on them performing the actions that they need to and the functionality that them and their customers need. So having robust security in place, particularly when it comes to protecting against malicious activity, is definitely becoming more and more of a priority. And it's something that we're speaking about on a day-by-day basis now, you know, with more and more FinTechs in particular. So I can definitely see more FinTechs looking for a dedicated bot management solution, and one that can cover, I guess, all of the attack surfaces. APIs, very, very important, but if you can have a bot solution that covers websites, mobile apps, and APIs in the one solution, then, you know, that's ideal for most of these customers.
Absolutely. And do you think that these customers are asking about APIs because awareness has grown and threats are targeting this layer more already? Because I know that a few years ago it was very much an unknown attack surface, but the fact that people are asking about it now shows that the awareness has grown. Do you think that's the case? Why do you think that would be?
Yeah, I think it's the awareness of, you know, APIs being targeted by bot threats has definitely grown, and it's definitely increased, and it continues to do so. It's still not as mature as other areas related to bot management, you know, for example, protecting your websites and, you know, mobile apps, but it's definitely becoming more of a topic of conversation, as we've seen with, as I say, existing clients and the discussions we're in right now. And I think the big thing for people right now is being able to understand how can they protect their APIs against these threats, and how can they actually get visibility on what these threats are looking to achieve. And that's important as well. It's being able to understand the intent of this traffic, you know, from a website perspective, and how that affects the other areas, you know, such as mobile apps and APIs.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, having visibility across your website, mobile app and APIs is so important. And in our recent research, which we discussed briefly today, we did discover that FinTechs still believe the website to be the most at threat, layer, and APIs to still be the least at threat. But I think that's when we consider perhaps the traditional banks or financial organizations versus FinTechs and the digital first environment that they are in, perhaps makes them a greater target, makes their APIs a greater target. And because they, you know, I keep saying it, but because they are digital first, they are more likely to be aware of it and aware of the threats that are not only targeting their websites and mobile apps, because they've been built into that environment from the word go. They don't have the traditional structure. Okay, so a couple more questions for you, Joe. Actually, straight off the back of my previous statement there. Do traditional banks have the same concerns? And not necessarily, do they think they have the same concerns, but is API security something that all banks should be taking into consideration?
Yeah, certainly. I think, some of the tier one banks that we're, currently in discussion with, they definitely see API security as something that they want to look into more closely, but it's definitely not top of the agenda. Protecting their websites and mobile apps is the one that they come to us to talk about first. Those are the two areas that they really want to speak to us about. And then, more often than not, I will raise the topic of API security with them, and we typically share some information with them, give them some content to digest, and they typically come back and they have a lot of questions around what does this mean for them, because I guess it's an area that I think there's a lot of education for a lot of different tier one banks out there to really absorb when it comes to API security. They've got dedicated teams, obviously, for API security, but when it comes to bot threats, I think there's definitely a level of understanding as to what that looks like. What does the bot threat look like when it comes to targeting APIs? So that's really where we're having a lot of conversations with, some of those sort of tier one banks and some of the financial services organizations outside of FinTechs, some of the more sort of legacy organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And today you said the credential stuffing is that greatest threat, and it is the threat that is most likely to affect FinTechs. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, this is really the sort of frontline feedback that we get from pretty much all financial services organizations that we talk to, whether it be FinTechs or tier one banks. They all have issues with credential stuffing. Now, there's been a lot of publicly known breaches that have come out over the last few years, but we definitely know there's more that aren't publicly spoken about, obviously for reputation protection reasons. And I think it's very important now for those organizations to think more seriously about bot management. That's the feedback that we're having right now. I think they tend to have had bot management on their radar. They might have been using some of the capability within their content delivery network, or using some of the capability within their web application firewall. But pretty much all of them that have been using capability from those other areas, they all come back to us and speak about the same thing. It doesn't do the job that they need. And if we look at some of the reports and content out there right now speaking about bot management, they all say the same thing. You need specialist tools to address this challenge. And I think that's where we've obviously put our focus, and the clients that work with us now have seen what that looks like in terms of real world application, and how effective we can be. And as I showed a little bit earlier on in the presentation today, we're able to detect a lot more than other types of mitigation and detection that you can put in place. So, and that's exactly what people want. They want accuracy, they want proactive detection, and they want to be able to mitigate in a way that they see fit, and have control over the way that they mitigate, particularly when it comes to protecting different attack surfaces. So protecting your websites, protecting mobile apps and APIs.
Okay, so let's talk about the need to understand the intent of the user, Joe, because what people are doing what the attackers are doing to carry out credential stuffing attack is effectively exploiting the core business logic of a website or of a mobile app. They're using the website exactly as it should be. They're entering credentials in order to access an account. There is nothing wrong in that activity itself. So what we need to understand is the intent of that user, of that individual user rather. Can you explain a little bit more about why understanding that intent is so important?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, Danny, is to understand where it all stems from, and it's about really understanding the behavior of users and where they've been on their user journey. And it's also about understanding the way the bot threats have evolved. And traditionally, they would target security vulnerabilities. Now they are definitely moving towards exploiting business logic, and they have been for some time now, as you mentioned there. So when we look at mapping out and understanding the intent of a user, what's important is being able to understand their user journey and being able to understand the different user paths that they can undertake and what functionality those paths provide. And that provides us with a really accurate picture of what their intent is in terms of where they've been on their user journey, what they're looking to achieve ultimately. And that plays a big factor when actually looking to be proactive about detecting malicious bot activity. Because as you say, the whole idea behind this type of bot activity is to be disguised as a real user and undertake what is seemingly normal activity. But because of the way, for example, our technology works and our machine learning works, we're able to use a number of different machine learning techniques and models to be able to understand user behavior, map out and understand the unique business logic of every client that we work with, and also track the usage patterns as well, being able to understand any anomalies that occur in terms of traffic spikes, things that could indicate smaller probe attacks, all the way up to those larger sustained attacks, like the ones that I showed earlier, occurring over a period of, sort of 60 plus hours. It's important to be able to pick up on all these different facets of behavior that factor into understanding the intent of what a user is looking to achieve. And ultimately, when we understand the intent, we can be far more accurate. And obviously that's paramount for us. Accuracy is paramount. And the other thing that's really at front of mind for all of our clients is user experience. And, using the sort of methodology that we use, and this is the feedback that, I've had from clients, is it's allowed the user experience to be as frictionless as possible. It maintains that high performance that all users are looking for. So being able to factor in the intent of what they're looking to achieve on a journey allows us to create a more positive user experience by not serving up unnecessary, things like unnecessary capture challenges, that type of thing. So yeah, the intent analysis is imperative.
Yeah, and it's about prioritizing those all-important genuine users and making sure that they can get through to where they need to be without being affected by, well, basically even knowing that any bot activity is going on in the first place, let alone the stage where any fraudulent activity is being carried out, which of course is the huge impact on any fintech.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for leading us in that discussion today and giving us that really valuable insight into the bot threat to fintechs and really getting into API security and credential stuffing attacks. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you have found all of those areas that we've discussed insightful. We will be putting the on-demand webinar on our website in the next coming days. So please feel free to watch again. And if you do have any questions about anything that we've discussed today, please do get in touch at hello@netacea.com. You can also contact us in the same place if you have any questions about your existing bot management strategy. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.